So in this lab, we're going to look at how to invoke machine learning APIs from within Data Lab. So let's go ahead, and this time, instead of going ahead and doing this notebook from scratch, we will start from a notebook that's already in our GitHub repository. So first we need to check it out. So let's go ahead and check out the notebook. And in order to do that, we have to clone the repo. So we'll go ahead and open up a Data Lab and then run a bash command from within Data Lab. So the idea here is that we can go ahead and start a new notebook, call this notebook whatever we want. Let's call it, checkout. Now, so far we've basically looked at running Python code within Data Lab, but by putting in %bash, this makes Data Lab run everything in that cell using bash. So this is like everything else in Jupyter. So here I'm basically going ahead and doing a git clone of our repo, and let's go ahead and do that. So at this point, I can do bang ls. That's another way to run bash. And you will notice that there is a folder called Training Data Analyst. And we can now go ahead and load up that notebook and start executing it. So there is Training Data Analyst. And this time, what we want to do is to go into Courses, Machine Learning, Deep Dive, and open up the mlapis.ipython notebook, and there is our notebook. So the first thing to do is to go ahead and enable APIs and services, and so that we can run the Vision API and the Translate API and the Speech API, etc. So we'll go down here. And type in Vision, and there is a Vision API. And the API is enabled. Let's go ahead and do the same thing for Translate and Speech. There's a Google Translation API. That's also enabled already. And the Natural Language API. There it is. That's enabled as well. And the Speech API, let's just make sure it's also enabled, and that's also enabled. So great. So all of the APIs are enabled. So let's go ahead and get the credentials. So we'll go down to the APIs and services and get the credentials. And here is that. So we already have the API key, so I went ahead and used it. Or I can go ahead and say create credentials with an API key and create a brand new key. Copy that, and there we go. So that's our API key. So here it is. And now we're ready to go into the ML APIs. And in our notebook, where it says API key, I will replace by the new API key that we have and run it. So I can either click the run button or I can do Shift Enter. So let's go ahead and install the Python client. So having done that, let's go ahead and run the Translate API. And you notice that there is the inputs. Is it really this easy? And you see the translation in French because we asked for the target to be French. Let's change the target to be ES, that's Espanol, and run it. And now what we get back is Spanish. So how does this work? We went ahead and specified the inputs as an array of strings and asked the service to go ahead and do a translation from English to whichever language we want, passing in those inputs. And what we got back is the outputs, the translated string. Similarly, what we want to do is to go ahead and invoke the Vision API. And to invoke the Vision API, we need an image. And in this case, the image is the image of a street sign. I don't know Chinese, so I don't know exactly what it says. Let's see what it says. So we'll go ahead and put this on cloud storage. So this is actually being made public, so we don't have to change anything here. We can go ahead and read, we can ask the Vision API to read that image and tell us what text is in it. So we can go ahead and run that. And at this point, we get back the JSON output. So again, what we are doing here is that we're invoking the version 1 of the Vision API, passing in the GCS image URI, GCS being, again, Google Cloud Storage. We have this image on cloud storage. We could also pass in the image as part of our request, but having it on cloud storage makes it faster because we don't have to upload all of that image data along with our request. And we're asking it to do text detection. And what comes back is all of the text in this image, along with the language, ZH being Chinese, and the bounding polygon of each of those pieces of text. We could, of course, go ahead and get the first piece of it, okay, and take that text annotation, get the language, the locale, which we said was ZH, and then we could go ahead and print out what we got, and we got back the foreign language, which is ZH, and the foreign text, which is all of this. Okay. So now what we can do is to go ahead and run it. Of course, the result of it having been run is already here, so I can click on this cell, clear it, and then now you can run it again and you can make sure that what you're being run is yours. And we see that the Chinese text has now been translated into English. The other thing that we can do is the language API. So here we have a set of quotes, and what we want to do is to look at the sentiment associated with these quotes. So again, as before, let's go ahead and clear the cell and run it. So in this case, we are printing out the polarity and the magnitude associated with each of these quotes. So the polarity is positive if it's a positive sentiment, it's negative if it's a negative sentiment. And that makes sense. If you say to succeed, you must have tremendous perseverance, that's a very positive thing. But if you say, for example, when someone you love dies, well, that's a pretty negative thing. So polarity is negative. And the magnitude is an indicator of how often very strongly worded language occurs in the text. The final piece that we're showing up here is a speech API. And as before, we have an audio file loaded into cloud storage, and we're asking for the result of that speech to be made into text. So we can go ahead and run that, and we get back a JSON response. And the JSON response with a very high confidence is that the speech is in that audio file is how old is a Brooklyn Bridge. So what we have done in this lab is that we've used Data Lab to use Python APIs to essentially invoke the machine learning models. So remember that these are not machine learning models that we had to build. These are machine learning models that we could just go ahead and use. We could incorporate these machine learning models into our own applications. This is something that you want to recognize, that not every ML thing that you need to do has to be done from scratch. If what you want to do is to recognize text in images, you might just use the Vision API.